The smell of burning drywall is sweet, almost like melting sugar, right before it coats your lungs in ash. The night our house burned down, my husband didn't look back. I lay pinned under a shattered beam, clutching our 3-year-old son, while David carried a crying, uninjured woman out the front door. His mistress. I choked to death on smoke and betrayal. Now, my eyes are open, the sheets are clean, and they have no idea what I'm about to do. Dying doesn't feel like falling asleep. It feels like drowning in dirt. The memory of the smoke was still thick in my throat, a heavy, greasy film that tasted of charred electrical wire and melting plastic. I remembered the heat most of all. It hadn't been a sudden inferno. It was a slow, suffocating oven that baked the air out of the nursery. I remembered my fingers digging into the carpet, the synthetic fibers fusing to my skin as I tried to drag my body over to where little Toby lay perfectly still in his bed. I remembered David's back, the tailored line of his expensive wool coat, dusted in white ash, retreating down the hallway. I had screamed his name. My vocal cords had torn with the effort, producing a wet, ragged sound. He hadn't even paused. He had his arms full. He was carrying Fiona, her face buried in his neck, her manicured hands clutching his collar. Then, the ceiling surrendered. A crushing weight, a snap in my spine. Silence. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of violently cold, clean air. My eyes snapped open. I was staring at a ceiling that was perfectly white, perfectly intact. No blistering paint, no swirling black vortex, just smooth, eggshell white drywall. The morning sun was slicing through the wooden blinds, throwing sharp, golden horizontal lines across the duvet. I shot up in bed, my hands immediately flying to my throat, then down to my stomach, then to my legs. The skin was cool, smooth, unblistered. My fingers were trembling so violently, I could hear my nails clicking against my collarbone. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed in harsh red numerals. 6:30 a.m., October 12th. October 12th. I scrambled across the mattress, kicking the heavy linen sheets away. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The year on the lock screen mocked me. It was 3 years ago. 3 years. I was not in the nursery. Toby was not 3 years old. Toby wasn't even born yet. My hand moved to my lower abdomen. The slight, barely there swell. I was 4 months pregnant. The nausea hit me then. Not morning sickness, but a violent visceral rejection of reality. I stumbled out of bed, my bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood floor, and barely made it to the master bathroom before I emptied my stomach into the porcelain bowl. I sat on the cold hexagonal tiles, pressing my sweating forehead against the edge of the bathtub. The bathroom smelled of eucalyptus and David's expensive shaving cream. It smelled like a lie. I was back. The universe had hiccuped, or God had blinked, or my sheer, unadulterated hatred had somehow ripped a hole in the fabric of time. I didn't care about the physics of it. I only cared about the facts. I was alive. Toby was safe inside me, and David was still asleep in the other room. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily against the granite vanity. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, the dark circles under my eyes, standing out starkly against my fair skin. But I was whole. The burned scars that had briefly melted my face to the floorboards were gone. I turned on the cold water, letting it run until it was freezing, and splashed it over my face. The shock of it anchored me. Through the open bathroom door, I heard the mattress creak. "Nora?" His voice, deep, rough with sleep, utterly familiar. A sound that used to make my chest warm, that meant safety, that meant home. Now it sounded like the grinding of metal gears. I grabbed a hand towel, gripping the thick cotton terry cloth so hard my knuckles turned stark white. I needed a second. I needed to not walk out there and drive a pair of grooming scissors into his carotid artery. I breathed in. 4 seconds. Held it. "Let it out. I'm in here," I called back. My voice was incredibly steady. It shocked me. It didn't sound like a woman who had just burned to death. I walked back into the bedroom. David was sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He was wearing the gray sweatpants I bought him for Christmas. His dark hair was messy. He looked exactly like the man I thought I had married. "You okay?" he asked, looking up. "Heard you in the bathroom. The morning sickness back?" He looked concerned. The slight crease between his eyebrows, the slight leaning forward of his shoulders. It was a flawless performance. If I hadn't seen him walk away while I burned, I would have believed he loved me. "Just a wave," I said. I walked over to my dresser. I kept my distance. If he touched me right now, I would vomit again, or scream, and the game would be over before it started. "I'm fine now. Take it easy today," he said, standing up and stretching. He walked past me, close enough that I could feel the body heat radiating off him. "I've got a late meeting tonight. Client dinner. Don't wait up. A late meeting. Client dinner." I remembered this day, October 12th. This was the day he bought her the diamond tennis bracelet. I had found the receipt in his glove compartment 2 years later, faded and crumpled, dated today. He had claimed it was a business expense, a gift for a retiring partner's wife. I had been stupid enough to believe him. "Okay," I said, pulling a cashmere sweater over my head, letting the soft fabric hide my face for a crucial second as a cold, ugly smile stretched across my mouth. "Have a good time." I didn't want to survive this time. Surviving wasn't enough. I wanted to tear his life down to the studs. I was going to burn his entire world to ash, and I wouldn't even leave him a window to crawl out of. The kitchen island was vast, a slab of pristine white marble that always felt too cold to lean on. I spent the afternoon there, a yellow legal pad and a pen in front of me, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator. I needed to catalog everything. My brain was a chaotic mess of timelines, bank accounts, passwords, and lies, all tangled up with the phantom smell of smoke. I forced myself to be methodical. I wrote down the numbers of our joint accounts. I wrote down the names of his shell companies, the ones he wouldn't establish for another 6 months, but the plans for which were already sitting in the bottom drawer of his home office desk. By 5 o'clock, the yellow pad was covered in tight, jagged handwriting, the blueprint of a man's complete ruin. I tore the pages out, folded them into a tiny square, and shoved them deep into the pocket of my jeans. I decided to cook dinner, not for him, for me, for the grounding routine of it. I pulled a heavy cast-iron skillet from the lower cabinet. The weight of it in my hand was satisfying, heavy, solid, capable of doing damage. I set it on the gas stove, turned the dial, and watched the blue circle of flame flare to life. I stared at the fire for a long time. It didn't scare me. It just looked hungry. I chopped onions. The knife bit cleanly through the layers, the sharp, acidic smell stinging my eyes, the physical sensation, the resistance of the onion skin, the dull thud of the blade against the wooden cutting board, pulled me firmly into the present. I wasn't dead. I was here. At 7:30, the front door unlocked. The heavy click of the deadbolt echoed through the quiet house. "Something smells incredible," David called out, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. He walked into the kitchen, shrugging off his suit jacket. He looked exhausted, rubbing the back of his neck. He walked up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. I froze. Every muscle in my body pulled taut like a piano wire. He smelled of expensive bourbon and something else, something synthetic and sweet. Pomegranate. It was her hand lotion. I remembered the scent from a bottle she had accidentally left in his car once. "How was the client dinner?" I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on the browning meat in the pan. I did not lean back into his embrace. "Brutal," he sighed, his breath warm against my neck. It made my skin crawl. Old man Peterson talked for 2 hours about his golf swing. "I'm exhausted." He stepped away to loosen his tie, completely oblivious to the rigidity of my posture. "Did you close the deal?" I asked, casually stirring the pan. "Almost there. Just a few more weeks of whining and dining." He leaned against the counter, watching me. "How are you feeling? How's the little guy?" He pointed at my stomach. A sharp, electric jolt of hatred shot through my chest. He was using the child he would eventually leave to die as casual dinner conversation. I pressed the flat edge of the wooden spoon down hard against the bottom of the pan to keep my hands from shaking. "He's fine," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from inside a tin can. "Doctor says his heart rate is strong." "Good, that's good." David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He immediately turned the screen away from my line of sight, his thumb moving quickly. A text. I turned off the burner. The silence in the kitchen felt heavy, suffocating. "Dinner's ready," I said. We sat opposite each other at the dining table. The only sound was the clinking of silverware against porcelain. I watched him eat. I watched the way he chewed his food, the slight movement of his jaw, the way he held his fork. He was just a man, fleshy, flawed, and entirely unremarkable in his selfishness. I had spent 5 years worshiping this man, molding my life to fit into the empty spaces of his. "You're quiet tonight," he noted, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Just tired," I lied, cutting a piece of meat I had no intention of eating. "Pregnancy drains you. Well, get some rest." My mother called, by the way. "She wants us over for Sunday dinner. The whole family will be there." I paused. Sunday dinner at the Miller house. A weekly ritual of passive-aggressive comments, dry roast beef, and suffocating pretense. In my past life, I had dreaded those dinners. His mother, Eleanor, had never thought I was good enough for her golden boy. His sister, Sarah, was a vapid social climber who treated me like the hired help. They had all known about Fiona. I found that out during the divorce proceedings that preceded the fire. They had welcomed Fiona into their homes for private lunches while I was home nursing Toby. They had covered for him. They had provided alibis. They were all part of the rot. "Sunday dinner," I repeated, a slow, cold feeling spreading through my chest. I wouldn't miss it for the world. David smiled, a genuine relieved smile. He hated it when I argued about seeing his family. "Great. I'll let her know." He went back to eating. I went back to staring at him. He thought he was sitting across from his docile, slightly anxious, pregnant wife. He didn't realize he was sitting across from his executioner. The air in the Miller household always smelled faintly of lemon polish and stale superiority. It was a sprawling, faux colonial estate in a gated community, the kind of house that demanded you wipe your feet twice and speak in hushed tones. Sunday afternoon, the gravel crunched under the tires of David's Audi as he parked in the circular driveway. "Just agree with whatever she says about the nursery colors," David muttered as he killed the engine. You know how she gets if she thinks we're ignoring her advice. In the past, I would have nodded, swallowed my pride, and let Eleanor bulldoze my choices for my own child's room. Today, I just unbuckled my seatbelt. The metallic click was loud in the quiet car. "I'll handle your mother, David," I said, stepping out into the crisp October air. He gave me a weird look over the roof of the car, a fleeting shadow of confusion, but smoothed his expression quickly into his default public mask of affability. The heavy mahogany front door swung open before we even reached the porch. Eleanor stood there, wrapped in a beige cashmere cardigan, holding a crystal wine glass. Her blonde hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet. "David, darling," she cooed, stepping past me entirely to embrace her son. She kissed his cheek, lingering for a moment, before finally letting her icy blue eyes slide over to me. "Nora, you look tired. Are you getting enough iron? You look terribly pale." "I'm perfectly fine, Eleanor. Thank you," I said, my voice deliberately flat. I didn't offer a hug. I stepped past her into the foyer. The house was suffocatingly warm. The central heating was cranked up, making the air dry and oppressive. I could hear the clatter of pots from the kitchen and the low murmur of the television from the den, where David's father, Arthur, was likely anesthetizing himself with golf. We moved into the formal living room. Sarah was draped over an armchair, tapping aggressively on her phone. She didn't look up when we entered. "Fiona says hello, by the way," Sarah said, her eyes still glued to her screen. The room went dead silent for a fraction of a second, the kind of silence that happens when a glass is knocked off a table right before it shatters. I watched David. His back was to me as he poured himself a drink at the wet bar. I saw his shoulders stiffen just a millimeter. The ice tongs clicked awkwardly against the glass. Eleanor cleared her throat, a sharp, warning sound. "Sarah, put the phone away. We have company." "Company? It's just Nora," Sarah muttered, finally looking up. She offered me a thin, insincere smile. "Sorry, I was just texting a friend." A friend. Right. In my first life, I hadn't even known who Fiona was at this point. I would have assumed it was one of Sarah's Pilates instructors, or a girl from her country club. I would have smiled politely and asked how she was doing. Now, the name hung in the air, smelling like burning plastic. "Fiona?" I asked, keeping my tone mild, inquisitive. I walked over to the beige velvet sofa and sat down slowly, letting my hands rest on my pregnant stomach. "Is that the new event planner you were talking about?" David turned around, drink in hand. His face was a masterclass in composed neutrality, but I could see the tiny pulse beating at the base of his throat. He was terrified. "Yes," Sarah lied, smoothly, effortlessly. She had clearly done this before. "She's helping me organize the charity gala next month." "Oh," I smiled. A wide, bright, entirely dead smile. "You'll have to introduce us. David, you should hire her for your corporate retreat next quarter. Keep the business in the family circle, so to speak." David swallowed his sip of scotch a little too hard. He coughed, pulling at his collar. "Yeah, maybe. We usually use an in-house team." Eleanor rushed to change the subject, loudly clapping her hands together. "Let's talk about the baby shower. I was thinking a tasteful duckling theme. None of those garish modern colors." I tuned her out. The confirmation was all I needed. The tight, defensive shift in Eleanor's posture. Sarah's brazen slip of the tongue. David's physical panic. They were a unified front of deception. I sat there for the next 3 hours, eating overcooked roast beef and drinking sparkling water, playing the role of the oblivious incubator. Every patronizing comment from Eleanor Every dismissive eye roll from Sarah, every fake, loving glance from David. It didn't hurt anymore. The grief and the betrayal had burned away in the fire. What was left in my chest was something much harder, much colder. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an architect. Monday morning, as soon as David left for the office, I drove to a neighborhood 3 towns over. It was a gray, industrial area, miles away from our manicured lawns and gated driveways. I parked my SUV in front of a dingy strip mall. The sign above the door read, G. Vance, Private Investigations. I pushed the glass door open. The office smelled of stale coffee and old paper. A man was sitting behind a battered metal desk, eating a slightly sad-looking turkey sandwich. He looked up, assessing my expensive coat, my leather boots, the diamond on my finger. "You look lost, lady," he rasped, wiping mustard off his chin with a paper napkin. "Divorce lawyers are downtown." "I don't need a lawyer yet," I said, walking up to the desk. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag and dropped it onto his blotter. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside was $10,000 in cash I had quietly withdrawn over the weekend from an old account my grandmother left me, one David didn't know about. The investigator raised an eyebrow, looking from the envelope to my face. "I need you to shadow my husband," I said, my voice hard, devoid of any emotion. "David Miller. I want photos. I want bank routing numbers. I want the deed to the apartment he's renting under his LLC. I want to know everywhere he goes and everyone he touches." He reached out, tapping the edge of the envelope. "For this kind of money, I can tell you what brand of toilet paper he uses. But let me give you some free advice. If you're looking for closure, you won't find it in a surveillance file." "I'm not looking for closure," I said, staring at the peeling paint on the wall behind him. I felt Toby kick, a tiny, sharp flutter against my ribs, a reminder of what was at stake. "I'm looking for leverage." The first manila folder arrived on a Tuesday. I found it wedged between the mailbox and the brick pillar at the end of the driveway, completely invisible from the street. The private investigator, Garrett, he'd told me to call him, was efficient. I took the envelope into the kitchen and locked the door behind me. My hands were damp. I wiped my palms on my jeans before breaking the wax seal. Even knowing the truth doesn't insulate you from the physical shock of seeing it printed on glossy 8x10 photographic paper. The first picture was taken from across a street, slightly grainy, framed by the blurry leaves of a parked car's windshield. David was pushing open the glass door of an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. His hand was resting flush against the small of a woman's back, Fiona. Her hair was a flawless, blown-out auburn, catching the late afternoon sun. She was wearing a cream silk blouse that clung to her shoulders. She looked up at him, her mouth open in a mid-laugh, her teeth perfectly white. David was looking down at her with a softness I hadn't seen directed at me since our honeymoon. I dropped the photo onto the marble counter. It made a sharp smack. My stomach plummeted. I grabbed the edge of the sink, leaning heavily over the stainless steel basin, waiting for the nausea to pass. I hated myself for the reaction. I had burned to death because of this man. I had spent the last week plotting his utter destruction. Yet, seeing the visual proof, the undeniable ink and paper reality of his preference for her, still managed to twist a rusted knife in my ribs. I was human. I was angry, and I was deeply, pathetically hurt. I breathed in the smell of the lemon dish soap sitting on the counter. It was sharp and artificial. It anchored me. I forced myself to pick up the rest of the photos. There were pictures of them getting into his car. Pictures of them walking into a high-rise apartment building on 4th Street. A printed log of times. Entered building, 2:15 p.m. Exited building, 4:45 p.m. 2.5 hours in the middle of a Tuesday workday. While I was at home, organizing the baby clothes, rubbing cocoa butter into my stretching skin, I shoved the photos back into the envelope and hid it in the empty space beneath the false bottom of my heavy winter boot box in the guest closet. My heart was hammering a frantic, irregular rhythm against my sternum. 2 days later, the pomegranate scent invaded my house. I was sitting in the living room, sorting through upholstery swatches for the nursery, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Sarah standing on the porch, holding 2 iced coffees. Next to her was the woman from the photographs, Fiona. "Hey, Nora," Sarah said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "I know it's unannounced, but we were just in the neighborhood looking at venues for the gala. This is Fiona, the event planner I told you about." Fiona stepped into the foyer. Up close, her skin was poreless. The smell hit me instantly. Sweet, cloying, heavy pomegranate mixed with vanilla. It was a suffocating cloud. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Nora," Fiona said. Her voice was pitched a little too high. A practiced, sugary melody. She held out a hand. Her nails were painted a stark, bloody crimson. I looked at her hand. I thought about the way those fingers had clutched David's collar while I choked on ash. The urge to grab her wrist and snap the bone backward was a physical pressure behind my eyes. I smiled. A tight, perfectly polite, socially acceptable smile. I took her hand. Her skin was warm and soft. Mine was freezing. "Fiona," I said smoothly, letting go after precisely 1 second. "Sarah mentioned you. Welcome. Your home is just stunning," Fiona said, her gaze sweeping over the crown molding and the expensive artwork. She wasn't just looking at the architecture. She was taking inventory. She was walking through the house she intended to take from me. "Thank you. David and I picked everything out together," I said, leaning against the doorway, blocking her path into the deeper parts of the house. We wanted a space that felt permanent. I watched her eyes narrow by a fraction of a millimeter, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of her crimson mouth. "Sarah tells me you're expecting," Fiona pivoted, looking down at my stomach. "How far along?" 4 months, I said. "A baby changes everything, doesn't it?" Fiona tilted her head, her expression oozing fake sympathy. "I hear it puts a lot of strain on a marriage. You must be so exhausted. It's so important for a husband to have outlets when things get stressful at home." The sheer audacity of it left a metallic taste in my mouth. She was testing the waters, probing for weakness. She thought I was a naive, pregnant housewife who spent her days arranging throw pillows. "David manages his stress perfectly fine," I replied, keeping my voice low, dropping the polite smile entirely. I held her gaze, letting my eyes go dead and hard. "He knows exactly where his loyalties are supposed to lie, and what happens when a foundation gets a termite infestation. You just have to tent the whole house and exterminate." Fiona blinked, stepping back slightly. The sugary facade cracked, replaced by a flash of genuine uncertainty. "Anyway," Sarah interrupted, oblivious to the dropping temperature in the room, holding out a sweating plastic cup. "I brought you a decaf." "I don't drink iced coffee," I said, looking away from Fiona to my sister-in-law. "But thank you for stopping by. I'm actually expecting a call from my doctor. You can see yourselves out." I turned my back on them and walked up the stairs. My knees were shaking so violently, I had to grip the mahogany banister to keep from stumbling. I had almost lost control. I had let the anger leak out. I needed to be colder. I needed to be ice. The glowing numbers on the microwave read 2:14 a.m. The house was completely silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning. I stood in the doorway of David's home office, a cup of lukewarm water in my hand. He was asleep upstairs, snoring softly, exhausted from another late night with clients. I stepped into the room. It smelled of leather polish and his dry-cleaned suits. The heavy mahogany desk sat in the center of the room like an altar. I walked around it and sat in his chair. The leather creaked, a sharp sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I froze, listening for footsteps upstairs. Nothing. I woke the computer monitor. A password screen blinked at me. In my previous life, I had never touched his computer. I respected his privacy. I believed a marriage was built on mutual trust. That trust had been the padlock on my own cage. I typed in the password I knew he used for everything. The name of his childhood dog, followed by his birth year. Buster, 1985. Incorrect password. I frowned. The blue light from the screen cast harsh shadows across the room. He had changed it. When? Why? I rested my forehead against the cool edge of the desk. Think. A man like David didn't change his patterns out of nowhere. He changed them to accommodate his ego. What was his new center of gravity? I typed Fiona, 1012, October 12th, the day he bought her the tennis bracelet, the day their affair had become serious enough to warrant diamonds. The screen unlocked with a soft chime. My stomach twisted into a tight, sick knot. Even anticipating it didn't dull the sting of being right. I opened his email client. My hands were moving quickly, muscle memory driven by adrenaline. I didn't bother looking through his personal emails. Those would be scrubbed or kept on a separate device. I went straight for the financial folders. I clicked on a folder labeled Westheimer Project. It was a maze of PDFs and spreadsheets. I opened one titled Asset Reallocation. The glow of the screen burned my eyes as I scanned the columns of numbers. My breath hitched, catching in the back of my throat. He wasn't just having an affair. He was bleeding us dry. There it was, neatly documented in black and white. He had taken a massive equity loan against this house. The house my parents had helped us put the down payment on. He had funneled the cash into an LLC registered under the name Apex Consulting. The registered address was the luxury apartment building on 4th Street. He was buying her a penthouse. Using the equity of the home, I was preparing for our son. I scrolled further down. The nausea clawing at my throat was entirely unpregnancy related. It was raw panic. He had also initiated a slow drain on our joint savings account. Small transfers, just under the threshold, that would trigger a bank alert, moving steadily over the last 3 months into offshore accounts I couldn't trace. He was preparing to leave me, and he was making sure I would be left with nothing but a heavily mortgaged house and an empty bank account. He hadn't just abandoned me to die in that fire. He had already set my life completely ablaze long before the match was ever struck. I pulled a small, black USB drive from my robe pocket. I jammed it into the port on the side of the monitor. The metallic scrape was loud in the quiet room. My palms were sweating, leaving greasy smudges on the plastic mouse. I started copying everything. The LLC registration, the bank transfers, the emails with his shady accountant who was clearly in on the scheme. A floorboard creaked in the hallway directly above me. I stopped breathing. The transfer bar on the screen showed 74%. I stared at the ceiling, tracking the heavy, sluggish footsteps. It was David, getting out of bed, walking towards the master bathroom. I heard the distant flush of the toilet. 82%. Come on. I heard the bathroom door open. The footsteps moved back towards the bed. Then they stopped. A long pause. I imagined him looking at my empty side of the mattress. 89%. Nora. His voice was muffled through the ceiling, thick with sleep, but questioning. I hovered my finger over the eject button on the screen. The footsteps started moving towards the bedroom door. He was coming downstairs. 96%. 99%. Complete. I ripped the USB drive out, shoving it deep into my pocket. I slammed the laptop shut and scrambled out of the heavy leather chair. I knocked my knee hard against the edge of the desk. The pain flared hot and sharp, but I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I made it out of the office and halfway down the dark hallway to the kitchen, just as the stairs groaned under his weight. Nora, what are you doing down here? I quickly turned on the tap at the kitchen sink, filling the glass I had brought down with me. I turned around, leaning against the counter, panting softly, as if I had just walked down the stairs myself. Just getting water, I said. My voice was shaky, but it sounded like fatigue, not terror. The baby is sitting right on my bladder. Woke me up. He stood at the base of the stairs, a dark silhouette in the gloom. He didn't move towards me. He just watched me for a long, uncomfortable moment. You should have turned a light on. You could trip, he finally said, his voice flat. I know the way, I replied, taking a slow sip of the cold water. The ice hit the back of my throat, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I live here, David. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel smelled of imported orchids, roasting duck, and the desperate sweat of people trying to prove they belonged. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the ladies' lounge, staring at the woman reflected back at me. I was wearing a floor-length emerald green gown. It was form-fitting, accentuating the undeniable curve of my pregnancy. I had paid a professional to do my hair and makeup. My skin looked porcelain and flawless. My eyes were heavily lined, sharp and dangerous. I touched the cold, heavy diamonds sitting at my collarbone. The necklace was an heirloom from my grandmother. It felt like armor. I took a deep breath, smoothing the heavy silk of the dress, and walked out into the deafening roar of the gala. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering dresses. A jazz quartet was playing loudly in the corner, trying and failing to drown out the aggressive networking. I spotted David immediately. He was standing near the ice sculpture, a glass of champagne in hand, laughing loudly at something a senior partner was saying. And standing 3 feet away, watching him with hungry, possessive eyes, was Fiona. She was in a backless crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination. She was holding a clipboard, playing the role of the diligent event planner, but her attention was entirely fixed on my husband. I walked slowly through the crowd. People parted for me, their eyes dropping to my stomach and then snapping back up to my face, offering tight, congratulatory smiles. I nodded, playing the gracious wife, but my eyes never left David. Nora! Eleanor's shrill voice pierced the hum of the crowd. She grabbed my arm, her long nails digging into the silk of my dress. She was wearing a violently pink gown that clashed horribly with her sprayed blonde hair. You look very bold, she said, her eyes dragging up and down my green dress with obvious disapproval. Is that maternity wear? It's vintage, Eleanor, I said smoothly, extracting my arm from her grip. Where is Sarah? I thought she was running this event. Oh, she's around here somewhere with that lovely planner girl. They've done such a marvelous job, don't you think? Eleanor beamed, gesturing to the room. Marvelous, I agreed dryly. I excused myself and navigated toward the bar. As I waited for my sparkling water, I watched David finally break away from the partners. He immediately walked toward a secluded alcove near the velvet curtains. Fiona handed her clipboard to a passing waiter and followed him. I took my glass and moved parallel to them, slipping behind a massive floral arrangement that shielded me from their line of sight, but kept me within earshot. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the noise of the ballroom slightly, making their hushed voices distinct. "You can't keep looking at me like that out there," David was hissing, his voice tight with panic. "My firm's managing partner is right by the ice sculpture. If he sees you staring—" "He doesn't care, David," Fiona interrupted, her voice dropping to a low, petulant purr. I heard the rustle of fabric. She was stepping closer to him. "Nobody cares, except your boring, pregnant wife." My grip on the glass tightened until I thought the crystal would shatter. "Don't talk about her right now," David muttered, though there was no real heat in his reprimand. It sounded more like exhaustion. "When is the apartment going to be finished?" she pressed. "I'm sick of living out of boxes. I want our space ready." The contractor said 2 weeks. The money from the equity line finally cleared. Just be patient. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I already knew. Hearing him say it, hearing him bargain away our son's future to appease this woman, severed the final, fraying thread of humanity I held for him. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement. I didn't storm over to them. I didn't scream. I simply walked past the gap in the curtains, my emerald silk dress swishing loudly against the marble floor. I stopped, turning my head just enough to make direct eye contact with David. He froze. His hand was resting halfway up Fiona's bare back. His face drained of all color, instantly turning the shade of old parchment. His jaw went slack. I didn't say a word. I didn't let my expression change. I just looked at his hand on her skin, then looked up into his terrified eyes. I let the silence stretch for 3 excruciating seconds. Then, I raised my glass of sparkling water slightly, in a silent, mocking toast, and walked away. I didn't look back to see him scramble away from her. I didn't care. I walked straight to the center of the room, found the managing partner of his firm, a stern, traditional man named Harrison, and engaged him in a loud, incredibly charming conversation about corporate tax law. 5 minutes later, David appeared at my elbow. He was sweating right through his expensive tuxedo jacket. The smell of his fear was pungent, sour, and utterly intoxicating. "Nora," he breathed, his hand hovering near my arm, too terrified to actually touch me. Are you having a good time?" I turned to him, smiling radiantly for Harrison's benefit. "Oh, I'm having a wonderful time, darling," I purred, my voice dripping with poison that only he could hear. "I was just telling Mr. Harrison here how brilliant you are at managing our finances, how you always find the most creative places to put our equity." David choked on a breath, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. The game had officially begun. The morning after the gala, the house felt different. The air was heavier, thicker, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the vents and replaced with raw, unadulterated paranoia. I woke up at 7. David was already awake. He was sitting on the edge of the mattress, fully dressed in his weekend clothes, jeans and a cashmere sweater, staring blankly at the wall. His knuckles were white where he gripped his phone. He smelled like sour sweat and stale champagne, a sharp contrast to his usual crisp cologne. He hadn't showered. "You're up early," I said, my voice thick with sleep. I pulled the heavy-down comforter up to my chin, watching him from the safety of the pillows. He flinched, a full, whole-body flinch, as if I had cracked a whip against the bedpost. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, not looking at me. He stood up quickly, shoving the phone into his front pocket. "I have to go into the office. Harrison wants to review the quarterly projections. Some discrepancy he wants to clear up." A discrepancy. I kept my face perfectly slack, blinking slowly, like a tired, pregnant wife. I knew exactly what that discrepancy was. At 3 a.m., while David was tossing and turning in a panic-induced sweat, I had scheduled an anonymous, encrypted email to be delivered to Harrison's private inbox. It contained 3 PDFs. The registration documents for David's secret LLC, the wire transfer logs from his corporate expense account, and a detailed summary of billable hours David had claimed to be working while his phone's GPS data, courtesy of Garrett, the investigator, placed him at the 4th Street penthouse. "On a Sunday?" I asked, sitting up slowly. I let one hand rest on my stomach. "You work too hard, David. You're going to burn yourself out." The word burn hung in the air, a tiny, cruel joke, just for me. "I have to go," he snapped, his voice cracking slightly. He didn't kiss my forehead. He didn't ask about the baby. He practically ran out of the bedroom. A minute later, the garage door rumbled, and his car tore down the driveway, spitting gravel into the street. I threw off the covers and walked to the window. The November morning was gray and aggressively cold. The trees were stripped bare, looking like jagged black fractures against the sky. I felt a deep, resonant calm settle in the center of my chest. The kind of calm that comes when you stop bracing for the impact and finally step on the gas. By Tuesday, the poison had officially entered his bloodstream. I was sitting in the waiting room of Donovan and Associates, the most vicious family law firm in the state. The waiting room didn't try to soothe you. It was all sharp angles, cold glass, and black leather. It smelled of floor wax and the bitter, metallic tang of expensive espresso. Mr. Donovan was a man in his late 50s, with eyes like chips of flint. He didn't offer me platitudes or pity when I laid the USB drive on his pristine glass desk. He just plugged it in, put on his reading glasses, and scrolled. The only sound in the room was the sharp click of his mouse and the distant wail of a police siren on the street below. "He's sloppy," Donovan finally said, leaning back in his chair. He took his glasses off and pinched the bridge of his nose. "He's commingling marital funds with this dummy LLC to buy real estate. But he's doing it using the same IP address he uses to pay your household water bill. He thinks he's smarter than he is." "Most men do," I replied, crossing my legs. "Can you freeze the equity line? With this proof, I can freeze the equity line, the joint accounts, and his personal checking. By Friday, he won't be able to buy a pack of gum without a judge's permission." Donovan looked at me, a genuine appraisal. "But once I file this ex parte motion, the bomb goes off. He will know it was you. Are you safe in that house?" I thought of the fire. I thought of the crushing weight of the ceiling beam, pinning my legs to the nursery floor, while my lungs cooked in my chest. "He's a coward, Mr. Donovan. Cowards only hit when they think you aren't looking. He's about to find out I haven't blinked in a month." I left the office with a stack of paperwork in my purse and drove straight to my mother-in-law's neighborhood. I wasn't done setting the traps. I needed to ensure that when David fell, there was no safety net waiting to catch him. Eleanor and Sarah were heavily involved in the local socialite scene. Sarah ran a charitable foundation, the Children's Educational Initiative. It was a tax write-off, dressed up in evening gowns, mostly an excuse for bored, wealthy women to drink expensive wine and pat themselves on the back. According to the files Garrett had handed me 2 days prior, Sarah had recently fired their long-standing catering and event vendor. She had replaced them with a brand new, sole proprietorship event planning company, Fiona's company. I parked down the street from Sarah's townhouse, pulling up the investigator's report on my iPad. I traced the numbers with my fingernail. Sarah was paying Fiona triple the market rate for event coordination. In return, Fiona was quietly kicking back 20% of her fee into a private account under Sarah's name. They were embezzling from a children's charity to fund Sarah's shopping habits and Fiona's designer wardrobe. David's mistress and David's sister, thick as thieves. I took out my burner phone, the cheap plastic heavy and unfamiliar in my palm. I dialed the tip line for the State Attorney General's office for charitable fraud. "Yes, hello," I said, pitching my voice slightly lower, adopting a clipped, professional tone. "I'm a former contractor for the Children's Educational Initiative, overseen by Sarah Miller. I have documented evidence of gross financial misappropriation and vendor kickbacks involving their current event planner. I'd like to arrange an anonymous document drop." I hung up, popped the SIM card out, and snapped the phone in half, tossing the pieces into the passenger footwell. When David came home that night, he looked like a corpse. His skin was a pale, sickly gray. His tie was stuffed into his jacket pocket, his collar unbuttoned. He walked into the kitchen and went straight for the liquor cabinet, ignoring me entirely. His hands were shaking so badly that the neck of the scotch bottle rattled violently against the rim of his crystal glass. I sat at the kitchen island, slowly peeling an orange. The citrus oil sprayed against my fingers, sharp and bright, cutting through the heavy smell of alcohol that was rapidly filling the room. "Rough day?" I asked quietly. He downed the scotch in one swallow, gasping as it burned his throat. He poured another. "Harrison put me on administrative leave," he said, his voice flat, hollowed out. He didn't turn around to look at me. He just stared at the backsplash. "They seized my work computer. Someone tipped them off about some accounting errors. I have an internal audit board meeting on Monday." He leaned heavily against the counter, his shoulders slumping. The arrogant, untouchable corporate lawyer was gone. He was rapidly deflating. "Oh, David, that's terrible," I said. I pulled a wedge of orange apart, the membrane snapping softly. I put it in my mouth. It tasted incredibly sweet. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. You'll clear it up." He finally turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed in red. He looked at my calm face, my relaxed posture, and for a terrifying second, I saw a flicker of genuine suspicion behind his panic. He was looking at me, really looking at me, trying to find the woman who would normally be rushing to comfort him, rubbing his back, offering to call his mother. I just chewed my orange and stared back, blank, unbothered. He blinked, breaking the contact, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. Yeah, it's a misunderstanding. I just need to figure out who has a vendetta against me at the firm. I need to make some calls." He grabbed the bottle of scotch and walked heavily up the stairs. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the floorboards creak above me. I threw the orange peels into the garbage disposal and turned it on, letting the loud, grinding mechanical roar drown out the silence. The explosion didn't happen all at once. It was a series of sharp, deafening detonations that ripped through the Miller family over the course of 72 hours. It started on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was an ugly, bruised, purple, threatening, freezing rain. I was sitting in a cafe across the street from the 4th Street luxury apartments, sipping a decaf tea. The mug was hot against my palms, grounding me in the physical present. I checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. Right on time, Fiona burst out of the heavy glass doors of the apartment building. She wasn't wearing her usual immaculate blowout or a silk blouse. She was wearing sweatpants and a puffy coat, her face flushed red with rage. She was screaming into her cell phone, pacing erratically on the sidewalk. Even from across the street, through the plate glass of the cafe, I could read her body language, the frantic chopping motion of her hand, the way she stomped her boot against the concrete. My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from Donovan, orders executed, accounts frozen, asset locks in place. Fiona was currently trying to use the debit card, tied to the dummy LLC, to pay the contractors working on the penthouse. The contractors who were standing in the lobby behind her, looking angry and holding their tool belts. She was calling David, demanding to know why the card was declining, why the accounts were suddenly locked. I watched her for 10 minutes. I watched the realization dawn on her that the limitless credit line she had been promised had vanished into thin air. The contractors eventually walked out, getting into their vans and driving away, leaving her standing on the curb, utterly alone. She wasn't a woman in love. She was a parasite, realizing the host had died. I took a sip of my tea. It was lukewarm. The next detonation happened on Friday morning. I was at home, packing a single, medium-sized suitcase in the guest room. I was meticulous. I packed my most comfortable clothes, my prenatal vitamins, and the few pieces of jewelry that actually belonged to my grandmother. I left everything else. The expensive dresses David bought me, the diamond engagement ring. I left it all sitting on the vanity in the master bedroom, a physical manifestation of everything I was discarding. Downstairs, the front door crashed open. It hit the wall so hard, the entire house shuddered. "Nora!" It was Eleanor. I had never heard her scream before. It sounded like a bird getting caught in an engine. I walked calmly to the top of the stairs and looked down. Eleanor was standing in the foyer, her hair a wild, unsprayed mess. Her face completely drained of color. She was clutching a thick manila envelope. Behind her, Sarah was sobbing loudly, her makeup running down her face in thick black tracks. "What's wrong?" I asked, resting my hand on the banister. "The police," Sarah choked out, falling against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the hardwood floor. "The Attorney General's office. They raided the charity office this morning. They took all the computers. They took my files." "Oh, Sarah, no," I gasped softly, putting a hand to my chest in a display of faux horror. "They froze my personal accounts," Sarah wailed, pulling her knees to her chest. "They said I'm under investigation for felony embezzlement. They're saying I funneled money through Fiona's company." Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes wild, frantic. "Where is David? I tried calling his office, but they said he's not permitted in the building. His cell phone is going straight to voicemail. I need him to fix this. Our family name is going to be dragged through the mud." They didn't know yet. They were so wrapped up in their own disaster, they hadn't realized David was drowning in his own. "I don't know where he is, Eleanor," I said, descending the stairs, slowly, deliberately. I walked past them, my shoes clicking softly on the floor. "He left early this morning. He's been very stressed about his own audit." "His audit? What are you talking about?" Eleanor demanded, grabbing my arm. Her grip was weak, trembling. I looked down at her hand, then up at her panicked face. I didn't smile. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my triumph. I just gave her the cold, hard truth. David is under investigation by the partners, Eleanor. He's suspended. It seems he's been stealing money from his clients and from us. I pulled my arm out of her grasp. If I were you, I would find a very good defense attorney for Sarah, and I wouldn't expect David to pay for it. I walked into the kitchen, leaving them sobbing in the foyer. The sound of their despair was a strange, discordant music. It didn't heal the burn scars on my soul, but it acted as a cooling salve. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, David finally came home. The house was empty of his family. I was sitting in the living room, waiting. The fireplace was lit, the flames dancing and snapping, casting warm orange light across the expensive rugs. I was watching the fire, remembering the heat, remembering the smoke. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I controlled it. David stumbled into the room. He looked destroyed. His shirt was torn at the collar, his eyes hollowed out, dark purple bags dragging down his face. He smelled of vomit in despair. He didn't notice me at first. He walked straight to his desk in the corner, ripping the drawers open, frantically tossing papers onto the floor. "They're frozen," he was muttering to himself, a frantic, disjointed ramble. "Everything is frozen. The LLC, the joint accounts. How did they find it? How did they freeze the personal accounts?" "Because I asked them to," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a gunshot. David froze. He slowly turned around. He looked at me sitting in the armchair, the firelight catching the sharp planes of my face. "What?" he whispered. "I filed for divorce on Tuesday, David," I said, my voice perfectly level. "My attorney filed an ex parte motion to freeze all marital assets because we have proof you were dissipating funds. And the firm found out about your little embezzlement scheme because I sent Harrison the documentation." He stared at me. His brain was misfiring, unable to reconcile the docile, obedient pregnant woman he thought he married with the executioner sitting in front of him. "You," he started, taking a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. "You did this. You ruined my career." "You ruined your career," I corrected him, not moving an inch. "I just turned on the lights." "The penthouse," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room as the pieces clicked together. "Fiona called me. The contractors walked out. The bank locked the LLC. Yes, that was my favorite part," I admitted, finally allowing a small, razor-sharp smile to touch my lips. "Did she break up with you yet? Or is she waiting to see if you can pawn your watch to buy her dinner?" The mention of Fiona snapped something inside him. A dark, ugly rage flared in his eyes. He lunged across the room, grabbing my shoulders, hauling me up from the chair. His fingers dug painfully into my skin. "You bitch!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips, hitting my cheek. His face was inches from mine, contorted into a monstrous mask of pure hatred. "You stupid, vindictive bitch. I will kill you. I'll take everything from you." I didn't flinch. I didn't struggle. I just looked him dead in the eye, smelling the sour rot of his breath. I felt a sudden, fierce kick against my ribs. "Toby, safe." "David," I said softly, my voice dripping with absolute venom. "Look behind you." He paused, his chest heaving, and slowly turned his head. Standing in the archway of the living room were 2 uniformed police officers. I had called them 30 minutes before he arrived, requesting a standby for a domestic disturbance while I collected my belongings. David let go of me, as if my skin had suddenly turned to molten iron. He stumbled backward, his hands raised, his bravado evaporating into thin air. "Officer," I said, smoothing down the front of my sweater. My voice trembled just a little, the perfect pitch of a frightened wife. He was getting violent. "I have my bag packed upstairs. I just want to leave safely." The dismantling of David Miller was not swift, but it was absolute. I didn't stay to watch the police escort him out of the house. I took my single suitcase, walked out the front door, and locked it behind me. The cold November air hit my face, shocking my lungs in the best possible way. I drove away and didn't look in the rearview mirror. I moved into a small, quiet townhouse on the other side of the city, paid for in cash from my grandmother's inheritance. I changed my phone number. I disappeared from his world entirely, communicating only through Donovan. The updates came in sterile, typed paragraphs over the next few months. David was officially terminated from his firm, stripped of his partnership, and reported to the State Bar Association. The criminal investigation into his financial fraud was ongoing, but the legal fees alone were bankrupting him. With the marital assets completely frozen pending the divorce settlement, he had no access to capital. Fiona, predictably, vanished. Donovan's private investigator confirmed she had packed up her apartment 3 days after the accounts were locked, leaving no forwarding address. She blocked David's number. She abandoned him the exact moment he ceased to be a walking ATM. Sarah's situation was equally disastrous. The state attorney general pushed for a plea deal, forcing Sarah to sell her townhouse to pay restitution to the charity. Eleanor, humiliated by her children's public disgraces, retreated into her sprawling estate, excommunicated from her country clubs and social circles. The Miller name became a toxic punchline in their gated community. As for the house, our house, the one that had been my tomb in another life, the bank foreclosed on it. David couldn't make the mortgage payments on a suspended license with frozen accounts. He was evicted in late January. I drove past the house once, a week after he was forced to leave. It was snowing. The heavy white flakes were falling silently, coating the manicured lawn, hiding the dormant rose bushes. The house looked utterly lifeless. No lights in the windows, no cars in the driveway. A massive "For Sale by Bank" sign was hammered into the frozen dirt near the mailbox. I parked across the street and just stared at it. I looked up at the window of the nursery. In my nightmares, I still saw the orange glow flickering behind that glass. I still smelled the melting drywall. I still felt the crushing weight of the ceiling beam. But sitting in my heated car, watching the snow fall on the empty shell of a building, the phantom smell of smoke finally, truly faded. I rested my hand on my massive, swollen stomach. Toby shifted, a heavy, rolling movement that made me catch my breath. "We're okay," I whispered into the quiet car. I wasn't just talking to my son. I was talking to the ghost of the woman who had died on that floor. We got out. The divorce was finalized in early April. I took the settlement, my fair share, meticulously stripped from his hidden accounts by Donovan's forensic accountants, and severed the final legal tie to David Miller. He didn't even show up to the final hearing. Donovan told me he was living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, awaiting his criminal trial. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no lingering anger, just the hollow, echoing satisfaction of a closed circle. 2 weeks later, my water broke. The labor was long, agonizing, and incredibly real. There were no supernatural reprieves, no easy outs. I labored for 18 hours in a sterile, brightly lit hospital room. I gripped the plastic rails of the bed, sweating, screaming, completely anchored in the excruciating, beautiful reality of my own body. When they finally placed him on my chest, the world stopped spinning. He was small, red, and screaming furiously. He smelled of amniotic fluid and iron. I wrapped my arms around his tiny, fragile body, burying my face in his damp, dark hair. His weight was a physical anchor, pulling me firmly, permanently into this new timeline. There was no smoke, there was no fire. There was only the smell of clean linens, the steady beep of the heart monitor, and the miraculous, steady rhythm of my son's breathing against my skin. He was here. I was here. I closed my eyes, exhausted and entirely victorious. I had walked through the fire, and this time I had brought the ashes down on the man who lit the match. The game was over. I had won everything that mattered. The fire didn't kill me. It forged me. Sometimes, the only way to heal a burn is to let the person who struck the match choke on their own ashes. If Nora's story of ruthless, calculated revenge made your heart race, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to support more gripping rebirth dramas. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that karma never misses. And subscribe to our channel for more intense, first-person storytelling. What would you have done in Nora's shoes? Drop a comment below. See you in the next story.